I'm going to focus part of my talk tonight on the story of the company that I wrote my book about, Blackwater, because I think that this is a company that really is a sort of metaphor for the way that U.S. foreign policy has shifted over the past decade under both the Bush and the Obama administrations. And I want to say at the onset that I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I consider myself a journalist, and I think that journalists have an obligation to hold those in power to the same standard, whether they're people that you like or people that you dislike personally, because personality doesn't really matter. It's their policies that should matter to journalists. I was telling John before I came up here tonight that it's, it's not a secret. I tend to be on the left side of the political spectrum. I write for The Nation magazine, which is one of the more famous liberal magazines in the United States. But the vast majority of the hostile mail or hate mail I get these days comes from liberals who are irritated with things that I've said or reported about President Obama's policies. And what I find very telling about it is that they're the very same things I was pointing out or reporting about those same policies when they were being implemented by President Bush. And I think that, in a way, that's a commentary on the times in which we're living right now in this country, where there's a great division along party lines, and somewhere in the midst of all of it, the actual truth of the matter gets lost. But before I talk about Blackwater and the privatization of U.S. warfare and U.S. foreign policy, and to an extent, domestic policy, because we see radical privatization occurring within the Department of Homeland Security, within our airports, prisons, schools, healthcare. We're in the midst of the most radical privatization agenda in the history of the United States, where we're shifting public money to the private sector in an unprecedented way. We're defunding public institutions and pumping with U.S. taxpayer dollars private institutions that are taking over functions that many would argue should be the sovereign realm of nation states or governments or public institutions. It becomes very deadly when you do this on the battlefield, and there is not a system of accountability for the private forces that is in fact enforced for members of the United States Armed Forces, who operate under a very strict legal code. And I'm going to talk about some of that momentarily. But first I wanted to talk a little bit about the current situation that we're seeing in the world, both domestically and internationally. As you know, and I don't know what the latest news is, there's a great chance that the government is going to be quote-unquote shut down. And it seems like the major sticking points right now in the whole scheme of things are absolutely ridiculous when you think about the fact that it could result, if the government is shut down, in U.S. troops not getting their pay, in many public institutions being shut down, including places like the Centers for Disease Control. The disaster that could happen as a result of this shutdown should not be understated. And yet the main issues that are centering in this debate are the issue of Planned Parenthood and abortion. That has become the primary issue. We're talking about $500 million for Planned Parenthood, an organization, the vast majority of the work they do has nothing to do with abortion, it has to do with preventative health care for women. And yet this is something that has become so important to some that the government may actually be shut down, and all of the consequences I cited, from troops not getting paid to the CDC being shut down, to thousands upon thousands of federal workers not getting a paycheck, mortgages going unpaid, families going without the ability to support their children. If you think about the fact that they're arguing around $400 or $500 million for Planned Parenthood, and then you rewind the clock a couple of weeks and look at the U.S. military action in Libya, you'll realize that the first week that the United States was bombing Libya, U.S. taxpayers spent $500 million on that operation. Every single missile that was launched, a Tomahawk cruise missile that was launched on Libya, cost $1.4 million. Some fighter aircraft that we are flying over Libya cost $80,000 an hour when they're in the air, to fuel and to support. So when we talk about federal dollars and realize that you can get stuck on $400 million, it's a spit in the ocean. We spend that in a minute in Afghanistan during the war. So we have politics now that is going to determine the fate of people's lives being used in a very sick and cynical way to push political agendas. And the Democrats do it and the Republicans do it as well.